wanted was to reconnect with Leo, her beloved lion. The last time she had seen him was 10 years prior, and she hoped to pick up their bond right where they left it. Yet, when Leo saw her, his reaction was far from what she expected. It was a cool evening when Emma returned to the reserve after all those years. Her heart raced, and her hands trembled as she thought of Leo, her favorite lion. 10 years ago she'd been forced to leave him behind, despite how deeply she'd grown to care for him. Now, as she neared his enclosure, she silently wished Leo would be as thrilled to see her as she was to see him. But she couldn't shake the creeping fear that pulsed through her veins, wondering if he had changed in ways she hadn't imagined. The reserve manager guided her toward Leo's den, set apart from the pride. He explained that Leo had isolated himself, refusing to mingle with other lions. The manager revealed that Leo hadn't been the same since Emma's departure. Not only had he become less social, but he had also grown more aggressive and fiercely protective of his territory, even toward other lions. Few could enter his den to bring food as he guarded it possessively. For the caretaker's safety, they had devised a feeding method that allowed them to avoid getting too close. Hearing all this pained Emma deeply. She was devastated to learn how much Leo had changed and felt a pang of guilt, wondering if her absence had been part of the reason. She couldn't alter the past, but she could focus on the present. Leo was the first animal she wished to see, not only because she longed to feel his soft, silky mane under her fingers once more, but also because she wanted to rekindle their special bond. Emma hoped to reignite what they once shared, or, at the very least, to start again from where they had left off 10 years ago. Still, Emma couldn't help but feel that her hopes might be unrealistic. She knew that just as she had changed over the past 10 years, so had Leo. There was a Leo he wasn't the lion she once knew. He might have completely forgotten her, or even worse, become too wild for her to approach. Their friendship hadn't sprung out of nowhere. It was rooted in kindness and a genuine desire to help. Emma had first encountered Leo when he was just a cub. During one of her usual hikes, something she loved as a member of the reserve staff and an avid nature enthusiast, she happened upon him. She always took the safest trails to avoid wild animals, but on this particular day she found the small cub lying by the side of the path, clearly injured. He looked like he had been attacked. One of his legs was broken, and he bore a painful wound along his side. The cub's pitiful whimpers hit Emma hard. She knew that, with injuries like these, he wouldn't last long on his own in the wilderness. It was also clear that his mother was nowhere near, and that he was entirely alone. Without hesitation, Emma took it upon herself to rescue the cub. She carefully lifted him into her arms, cradling him as if he were a baby, and hurried back along the trail to reach the vet. There, the medical team immediately began his treatment, administering painkillers and cleaning his wounds to prevent infection. Throughout the entire process, Emma stayed with him. The little lion quickly grew attached to her, wrapping his small paws around her fingers and refusing to let go, as if he saw her as a haven. Emma felt her heart melt at his actions, and she couldn't imagine the suffering he'd endured alone on that path. She promised him that she would personally ensure he received all the care he needed to grow up healthy, just like the other lions in the reserve. After a few weeks, the cub was finally well enough to leave the clinic. By then, he was a completely different animal from the helpless creature Emma had found. He was always darting around, filled with energy. He'd attempt a tiny roar, and then roll onto his back, waiting for Emma to give him a belly rub. She couldn't help but laugh at his antics, seeing how happy he was, and it filled her with joy to know she had played such a vital role in his recovery. Everything about his journey seemed extraordinary, how he had made it to the path despite his injuries, how she had found him just in time, and how he healed so completely. These small miracles led her to name him Leo, seeing him as a living embodiment of it. Once he was healthy enough to leave the clinic, Leo joined the other lions at the reserve. He was a bundle of joy, and by then Emma had grown deeply attached to him. She volunteered to be his main caretaker and took on full responsibility for him, a duty she embraced wholeheartedly. Each day she spent at least a few hours with him. Mornings were his favorite because that's when Emma arrived at the reserve, while evenings were his least favorite, as she had to leave then. They shared so many moments of joy, watching him grow from a playful cub into a powerful young lion. As he grew, Emma had to be more cautious. Leo was becoming a full-grown lion, and she could no longer roll around with him due to his size and strength. When he roared now, the very ground of the reserve would shake and birds would scatter from the trees. She felt proud of him and the progress he'd made. Then, one night, an incident occurred that tested their bond. While Leo was sleeping in his secluded corner of the reserve, a cobra somehow escaped its enclosure and slithered into his den. The snake's menacing hiss jolted Leo awake, and what followed was a dramatic struggle for survival. The cobra lunged, but with a powerful roar that shook the reserve, Leo leapt aside. His roar immediately alerted the night staff, who rushed toward his den. The snake quickly coiled around Leo, sinking its fangs into his leg. With a fierce growl, Leo rolled onto the ground, shaking the cobra off and sending it flying. The snake regrouped, lunging once more, but this time Leo anticipated the move and caught its head in his jaws, delivering a crushing blow that nearly immobilized it. But Leo staggered once and then collapsed, overcome by the cobra's venom, which was already coursing through his system. Just then, the staff burst into his den, managing to remove the snake. Leo was barely conscious, unable to move, as they placed him on a stretcher and rushed him to the clinic. That night, Emma received a call informing her of the terrifying incident. She leapt out of bed, rushing to the clinic to be by his side. The venom had spread fast, and Leo was in unbearable pain. Tragically, the reserve had no anti-venom for this particular type of cobra, and the painkillers the vet administered were ineffective. Preparing a new anti-venom would take a full day, and with each passing second, Leo's condition worsened as the venom began attacking his vital organs. The staff realized the antidote might not be ready in time. The reserve manager took Emma aside, explaining that they could ease Leo's suffering by putting him down rather than allowing him to endure further pain, but Emma couldn't bear the thought. She insisted that Leo was a fighter and would pull through, reminding the manager of how he had survived against the odds when she'd first found him injured on the trail. She assured him that Leo would make it until the antidote was ready. The night passed, with Leo still unconscious. An EKG machine monitored his vitals, the only sign of life as the team did everything possible to keep him comfortable. By morning, the anti-venom was finally ready. The vet administered it immediately, and it began counteracting the venom's effects. For the next few days, Emma and her colleagues waited anxiously while the vet tended to Leo around the clock. Emma feared the worst. She had shared so many moments with him and wasn't ready to lose him just yet. It seemed that Leo sensed the sincerity Emma wanted to convey to him. Finally, a week later, the vet announced that Leo was stable and recovering well. He remained in the clinic for a few more weeks before his discharge. When he was released, Leo was the happiest lion in the reserve. He roared joyfully, running and leaping, even startling the zebras. Emma's heart swelled with pride. She had been right to call him a fighter, and she was grateful he had lived up to his name. Life at the reserve returned to normal, but soon Emma's life outside the reserve took a dark turn. Her husband David was a prosecutor, well known for his tough stance and high conviction rate. Recently, he had succeeded in getting a life sentence for a dangerous crime syndicate leader. Unfortunately, the man's brother swore revenge on David and his family. Recognizing the severity of the threat, the authorities advised David and Emma to relocate immediately. The sudden news was a shock. Emma couldn't imagine abandoning her life in the city, let alone leaving Leo. Yet, knowing her safety was paramount, She planned to visit Leo the next day to say goodbye, uncertain when she would see him again. But that night, the police discovered an imminent threat, forcing David and Emma to flee with nothing but what they could carry. They were moved to a safe house under new identities, which ultimately saved their lives. If you're still following this emotional story, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support our channel and help us bring you more amazing stories. Now, let's get back to the story. For 10 long years, Emma and David lived in hiding. Though she found a new job to keep herself occupied, Emma never forgot about Leo. She often wondered if he was thriving, if he had found a mate, or if he missed her presence. She promised herself that he would be the first she visited once it was safe to return. Finally, 10 years after they left, David and Emma received word that all members of the criminal organization, including the vengeful brother, had been captured and sentenced. Relieved, Emma eagerly resumed her life without fear, ready to return to the reserve. The very next day, she went to see Leo, choosing the evening after he'd finished his meal, knowing he'd likely be in the mood to play. As she stood at the entrance to his den, her heart pounded, and she felt a lump in her throat. The manager suggested she step back, warning her of possible danger, but she was resolute in her desire to see if Leo still remembered her. Stepping forward slowly, one cautious foot at a time, Emma held her breath as Leo sensed her presence. His massive body tensed, and a chill ran down her spine. With a grunt, he rose to his feet, stretching and turning to face her. In that instant, their eyes met. As if her heart had stopped, Emma could barely recognize Leo in those eyes. He no longer resembled the cheerful, playful lion she had left behind. His gaze was somber, and she couldn't shake the sense that he was moments away from anger. Fear gripped her, but she stood her ground, relying on her training to steady herself. Although she felt terrified, she refused to let it show. Instead, she spoke softly, as though her words were meant for his ears alone. "It's me, Leo. Do you remember me? I'm Emma." Leo stared at her, unmoving. Then suddenly, his body tensed, and he leaned back. The onlookers gasped, and Emma felt her spirit leave her as well. She recognized the movement. Leo looked as though he was readying himself to pounce. At once, the manager ordered Emma to leave the den and called for a tranquilizer to calm the lion. But before anyone could react, Leo leapt into the air, charging directly at her. Emma stumbled back, a scream escaping her lips. He landed just a few feet away and began walking toward her with deliberate steps. Emma continued to back away, only to trip over a stone and fall to the ground. Another collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Leo reached her and stood over her, looking down into her fearful eyes. Then, slowly, he lowered his massive head to her face and began to lick her cheek. For a few seconds, Emma was certain she was dreaming, but the wet, rough feel of his tongue told her otherwise. Leo remembered her. A laugh of relief bubbled out of her as she sat up and threw her arms around him, hugging him as tightly as she could. His body was so large that her arms couldn't reach around him, but she didn't care. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I'm so sorry for leaving you. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye." Her tears soaked into his thick fur, but she continued, "I'm here now, and nothing is going to separate us again." Around them, the crowd began clapping, first one person, then another, until everyone was applauding. It was one of the most extraordinary reunions they had ever witnessed between an animal and a human. They were deeply moved by the enduring bond between Leo and Emma, even after 10 years of separation. Emma was overjoyed by how things had turned out with Leo. She resumed her role as his caretaker, and they began spending nearly every day together. Leo's demeanor improved rapidly in the following days. He ate with newfound enthusiasm, and even started socializing with the other lions in his pride. Now that he knew Emma was with him again, he felt secure and free to do anything he desired. What a beautiful story. Who would have guessed that Leo would remember her after all these years? What would you have done in Emma's shoes? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. See you in the next video.